Thanks for joining us this evening. My name is Claire Walsh and I am the Curator of the Art Collection at the University of Edinburgh. And I'm joined by my colleague Liv Laumenech, who's the Assistant Curator of the Arts Collection at the University. And we're really delighted to be here tonight to be speaking to you about the University Art Collection. And we hope that within the space of this short talk to kind of give you a sense of both the history of the collection and what we're kind of currently doing with it. So what our current focus is. So we begin tonight with the idea that all collections are site specific, and we'll kind of touch on some of the histories of the university and its activities over the years that have shaped the collection. We kind of hope to do this to draw these moments to kind of frame a series of recent acquisitions and activities by our team that reflect wider research that's been happening across the university into its own history in recent years. And that activity is happening in several different schools and institutions. And that's one of the benefits of having an art collection that's part of a university, is that, you know, there's access to so much interesting academic work and potential and possibility for collaboration. So some of this work I mentioned into the recent history of the university, or into the recent work into the university's history that I'd mentioned, especially in relation to our talk, is the work undertaken as part of the University Histories Project, which is being coordinated by the Heritage Collections team, of which the art collection is a part, and which kind of promotes the use of university heritage collection objects as kind of objects of research into these histories, especially histories that look at the university's own links to colonialism and slavery and of fossil fuel extraction. So we're going to divide the talk into two sections. In the first section, I will talk to you guys about two contemporary artworks in the collection that highlight how we acquire contemporary art now, which is one of the main focuses of what we do, and that also kind of highlights the development of a sub-collection, which is dedicated to contemporary art and research. And in the second half of the talk, Liv will show kind of how artworks are presented around the campus, and she'll talk about the role of commemorative commissioning at the university. She'll also give some overview of some key developments in the collection's own history and focus on key works in the collection in doing so. So the university, as a quick introduction, the university started collecting art around 350 years ago, and it's now composed of almost 8,000 artworks. These works date from the 1st century CE to contemporary works that are made this year, and actually to ongoing commissions that are due to come to fruition next year. So in 2012, there was a merger between the university and the Edinburgh College of Art, and that saw the ECA collection join the historic holdings of the Fine Art Collection, which kind of marked a huge shift in the type of collection that the university had. What the works that are in the collection include historic sculpture and portraiture, Renaissance paintings, examples of 19th century miniature painting from South Asia, and we have a range of modern and contemporary artworks that include painting, sculpture, photography, installation, video, and we've even in more recent years acquired performance artwork. So a hugely vast and diverse collection that we have. So these are divided into a number of sub-collections. These are sometimes grouped by genre, for example, with the Portraiture sub-collection, and sometimes they're grouped by the donor, for example, with the Tor sub-collection. And the curatorial team for the art collection is made up of myself and Liv, as well as Julianne Delaney, who is the curator of the art collection currently on maternity leave, but who has led on shaping the collection over the past number of years. We are located at the Centre for Research Collections at the main library of the university, and you should see that to the right-hand side. You'll see a photograph of the library there, and we're actually based on the top floor within the Centre for Research Collections, where all of the wider heritage collections are made accessible for teaching and for use in research. But we also lend the collection to external venues, and it's frequently included in curated temporary exhibitions by our colleagues at the university's Talbot Rice Gallery. But as I mentioned, our main focus over the past number of years has been on acquiring and using artworks in support of research and teaching at the university. Um, so yeah, I suppose to go back to the site and this idea of linking the historic and the contemporary, our site, the University of Edinburgh itself, was founded in 1583. And this time in the late 16th century was, of course, a historic global moment marked by European invasions of the so-called New World, the legacies of which continue to shape and haunt our world. This historic moment and the legacies of the modern Atlantic world are explored in a series of prints by Barbadian Scottish artist Alberta Whittle that were acquired by the university in 2020. And you'll see them here installed in the Dundee Contemporary Art exhibition, for which they were commissioned. And this was part of a solo exhibition titled How Flexible Can We Make the Mouth by Alberta in 2019. These prints incorporate and kind of subvert this New World imagery from that almost that exact same time period as the founding of the university in the 1580s. So the series itself is titled Secreting Myths, and the central imagery is based on these 16th century engravings by the European artists whose works what they were doing was illustrating the arrival of Columbus, Vespucci, and others in the Americas, and the subsequent violent suppression of indigenous peoples. The engravings, such as these ones, and from this era, were the work of almost exclusively white European male artists, were used to kind of visualize for European audiences these kind of first encounters between the conquistadors and the peoples and territories in the Americas and the West Indies in the late 15th century. And they were obviously used with a very specific political purpose, to tell the story in a very one-sided, Eurocentric and problematic way. So I've just shown you here now a kind of a zoomed in image of one of the pieces so you can get a sense of what I'm actually talking about. This piece, Secreting Myths Golden Yellow, which is a laser engraved woodblock print, is based on a print made by a Netherlandish engraver Johan Stradanus, sometime between 1587 and 89. So that's what you see in the kind of graphic image is actually an inversion of this print, which was titled The Discovery of America, or in other places it's called An Allegory of America. And it depicts, as he said, Amerigo Vespucci, who undertook several expeditions to South and Central America in the late 15th century, early 16th. And he was spurred by Christopher Columbus's earlier journey. So here in the drawing, he's shown naming the allegorical figure America, who is a feminized version of his own name, who we see here as the young woman reclining in a hammock, while Vespucci stands with his holding a brass Marines astrolabe, and also a crucifix with the flag. So these juxtapositions between the America, who's this kind of showcasing the indigenous population, and the European explorer, were encouraged viewers to make particular associations. Vespucci here represents order and those that are civilized, and America symbolizes disorder and the uncivilized. So Alberta Whittle's works really kind of play with this kind of distorting mythologies and further distort them by kind of, in the first place, she inverts the image back to front, and she layers them with this well, first she also uses this really intense color, which is connected to her childhood memories in Barbados, as the backdrop. So the imagery is actually deliberately quite hard to read, and that's part of the work that she's doing here, which is deliberately kind of obscuring the colonizers and their colonizing gaze. And you'll see on the face of Vespucci, the character depicted here, is actually a golden snail trail, which is based on the invasive giant African snails from Whittle's hometown in Barbados. And these kind of gestures are kind of put together to kind of form this basically a new story, a new image by Whittle. And these are really key works for us in our collection. They They talk to these histories that we're interested in exploring, but they also represent Alberta's practice in relation to other works in the collection that we have. So we actually have acquired 9 works by Alberta in total, 2 moving image works and the rest are works on paper. And that's something that we're kind of interested in doing with the collection, is using, trying to represent widely artistic practice from different time periods in their work. And also this work is used widely in teaching, so it's not displayed anywhere around campus. It lives in our stores at the moment, but it's used quite frequently on different courses at the university. Most recently, it's been used in the postgraduate course in Modern and Contemporary Art of the Black Atlantic, and you can see why it makes sense for students to analyse the work in the context of that course. Another reason I wanted to bring this work up today was to talk about this sub-collection that's really important for the work that we do now with the art collection, and that's the Contemporary Art Research Collection, which is shortened as an acronym to CARC. And Alberta's works are part of CARC, so they exist as part of this group of works, of which there are now 49, which was set up in 2015 in partnership with academics at the School of the History of Art. And it was set up to specifically think about developing a collection for research and developing a collection that looks into certain themes like globalization, intersectional feminist thought, and social reproduction. So this is a key work obviously within that collection, and other works include pieces by Martha Rosler, Tessa Lynch, Winnie Herbstein, and many others. That talks to the fact that we have an acquisition budget each year, quite a healthy one, and we use that to try to work with artists to purchase contemporary artworks, but also to work on commissions with different artists. And another way that we've been trying to think about that is how we can use acquisitions processes to support artistic production at different points, so that we're not always just buying the end product, but we're also sometimes purchasing related research materials that can kind of help support artists to produce more work. So that kind of takes me to the next slide, and the second piece I want to talk about, which is also part of the CARC collection, and this is one of the kind of key works from that collection, which is Workers. This work came out of a 3-year collaborative project between Swedish artist Petra Bauer, Collective Gallery in Edinburgh, the production company Her Films, and Scotland-based sex worker-led organisation ScotPep. And the project focused on an ongoing campaign for workers' rights within the sex industry. This banner, which was created by artist Fiona Jardine, along with Bauer and ScotPep, is one of 3 parts of the overall work, which were acquired for the university. And they were acquired over a number of years as a way, as I mentioned, to engage with and support the artistic production processes. And also to maintain a working relationship with the artist over the process. You'll see in the title here, this piece is actually called Phase 1, Phase 2, and there is a Phase 1 which I'll show you shortly in another slide. But this piece, and then there's which also refers to a research folio, and Phase 3, which is the main component of the work, is a film made by the collaborators. And the film was filmed in the Scottish Trade Union Congress in Glasgow, following a 1-day occupation by ScotPep, and conversations unfolding that centred around the voices of sex workers demanding to be seen as experts on their own work and lives. So the ScotPep banner shows 2 red umbrellas, which is the international sign of the sex workers' rights movement. And this banner, one that you see here, was actually used, there's 2 of these banners made in almost exactly the same, and one of them obviously came into the collection, and the other one was used by ScotPep in the 2018 May Day March in Glasgow. And as far as I know, it's actually actively used by them still. So there's kind of a relationship between something in the collection, something that's actively used in kind of political usage. And if you just go on to the last slide there for me, Liv, this is the Phase 1 piece that we described, which is an archive box, and it shows recorded research materials that came out of the project. And this was actually the first thing that was purchased as a way to kind of support the project further. And it contains a huge, amazingly detailed bibliography of references and sources, so that that were collected by all the people working on the project over the 3-year period. There's articles, books, films, newsletters, reports, and briefing papers. And the box is actually designed with the intention to be used by researchers as a starting point for future research on feminist practices and sex work politics. So that's just that this piece is something that has kind of spurred further works for the collection to be purchased around research that develop around artworks, and we use this in our teaching, and you can see how it kind of is very useful in that sense. So yeah, I just wanted to talk about those works because they talk to the dynamic kind of acquisition models and collecting models that we're using, and how we use support artistic research as well as production. I will now hand over to my colleague Liv, who will begin her presentation with a kind of focus on commissioning around campus. Thank you.
Hello everybody. Apologies if anybody's been having or seeing any technical difficulties. I've been having some on my end, so apologies if that's been the case. But as Claire mentioned, commissioning new art is a significant strand of activity for us and is an important means to develop the collection and to support living artists, as Claire said. But it also can provide significant avenues to develop working within and reflecting upon the history of the institution. So in 2019, we worked on updating the university's commissioning guidelines, and this was quite an important kind of piece of activity for us because it really opened up appetites and conversations around commissioning models at the university. And essentially our commissions are constructed in a variety of ways. Occasionally we work with academics on the production of artworks in response to specific research that's happening across the institution. But we've also been excited as well to explore possibilities around commissioning and exhibiting artworks in tandem with external organisations. And this is particularly because we don't have a kind of dedicated permanent gallery space on campus. But commissions also happen in response to physical sites or commemorative moments happening at the university. In these cases, we usually manage the commissions on behalf of an area or department. And a recent example of this was with the College of Science and Engineering. So the college sought to commission an artwork to mark the centenary anniversary of their campus, the King's Buildings. And so following the commissioning guidelines process, the artist Katie Patterson was commissioned, and she installed her artwork Ideas in 2021 across campus. The commission comprises 100 three-lined texts made from micro waterjet cut stainless steel, much like the one you see here on screen. Each idea, or each piece is an idea, and they are located all across campus. Some ideas are immediately visible, and others are in unexpected places, high and low, inside and outside, all across the gardens and grounds of KB. And each work is inspired by scientific thought and research with wide subject matter ranging from the first colours on Earth to the universe's last stars. And they touch on fields such as chemistry, biology, astronomy, geology and geography. The work is also accompanied by a digital website and a bespoke map located at ideas.is.ed.ac.uk. And much like the other works in the collection, our commissions on campus are also integrated in teaching, and we've been very lucky to be able to deliver seminars on ideas and have visits to KB with students since its installation, and this has been a really, really fruitful way to engage with the work and kind of learn more about it as it embeds in on campus. And this is just one of many sculptural works on campus, and in fact one of many sculptural works at the King's Buildings. And like Ideas, many of these works kind of mark historical moments or milestones within the university's history. And as such, they kind of operate as a form of, or a visual manifestation of institutional memory. But the university has been commemorating its history through art for many years. In fact, for numerous decades, this was primarily achieved through portraiture. So the work that you see here on screen is, as far as we know, the first artwork to be mentioned in the university records. It was painted in 1616 and donated in 1676 by the sitter's granddaughter. So this is a 3/4 length portrait of Lord Napier of Murchison. And John Napier was a mathematician and theologian who died in 1617. And he's kind of credited with inventing a sort of a proto-calculator, a device that helped people multiply in large numbers very quickly. So the collection started out, in a sense, as a collection of portraits like this one. And so we often now talk about this early stage of the university's collection as being about identity building. The university demonstrating its networks, kind of celebrating the success stories through traditional portraits of learned people like Murchison. But the majority of portraits depict staff, alumni, and donors connected to the institution. And the university essentially acquired these in many different ways, so through purchase, commission, and gifts. And although this was a largely ad hoc process, this collecting continued from 1676 right the way through to the contemporary age. So much so that today we have the second largest portraiture collection in Scotland after the National Portrait Gallery here in Edinburgh. And in the beginning, the portraits were mainly displayed in the university's old college, particularly the Playfair Library. And the legacies of these kinds of displays are still seen today, and as you might see in this contemporary picture of the space. So completed in 1827 by William Playfair, this was the university's main library until the 1960s. The architecture is in keeping with the kind of neoclassical style that was very popular at the time, and contributed to the image of the university as a centre of knowledge and a symbol of Enlightenment thought. And some of you might already know that Edinburgh around this period was often described as the Athens of the North. So the display of busts was also in keeping with the aesthetic, inspiration and the architectural atmosphere of the time. And many other universities that date back to around this period have busts like this on display in their libraries as well, so places like Oxford or Trinity College in Dublin. And in many cases, the institutions will have busts on displays of figures that are of general significance in academia, so William Shakespeare, Plato, etc. But in the Playfair, we have depictions of former staff, professor, chairs, principals, chancellors, or alumni. So they're all connected to the institution. Today, there are 38 busts in the Playfair Library, and among them are professors of very familiar subjects like anatomy, botany, chemistry, and some unfamiliar subjects such as conveyancing and medical jurisprudence. The sitters' time at the universities ranges from between 1720 and 1903, and all are British white men. And of those that we have dates for, the sculptures themselves range from 1814 to 1916. And actually over 90% again of those that we have dates for were created in the 1800s. So in a sense, this is a very kind of limited demographic and a very specific period of time that has been commemorated through this display. And in a sense, looking at it through this kind of lens reveals a lot about the kind of networks of people at the time, the politics of displaying artworks of the past, and particularly the kind of legacies of the university's connection to the Enlightenment. Looking also at the individual sitters represented also reveals quite a bit about the institutional history, and in some cases the significant educational links to empire and colonialism as well. So one example of a bust in the Playfair Library is pictured here, a representation of William Muir. For those who might not be familiar, Muir was a principal of the university from 1885 to 1903. He was a scholar of Arabic and the history of Islam, and he also started a professorship of Sanskrit at the university. And his views on Islam were criticised for taking a negative and problematic view. And prior to his time at the university, he played a significant role as a colonial and administrator in the East India Company, and he lived for quite some time in British India. And during his time in India, he became Foreign Secretary of the country, and he was also governor of the Northwest Provinces. He retired from India in 1876 and as I said, subsequently took up a position at the university. And also looking at these works as artworks reveals quite a bit as well. Again, all the artists are white British men, but although that's not surprising given that the artists working at the time. But crucially for the art collection, the sculptures represent a kind of cross-section of contemporary artists working at this time. So people like William Brodie or Charles McBride, as is the case with the bust of Muir. And while thankfully lots of things have changed, the legacy of actively collecting contemporary art and commissioning and supporting contemporary artists is in a sense what we're continuing today at the university. So a few years after the Playfair Library was built in 1827, the university was bequeathed a collection in 1836, the Tor Collection. This was gifted by Sir James Erskine, who was a baronet of Torry, which is in Fife. And the collection consists of 46 paintings, 27 pieces of sculpture, and 3 bronze vases. The main emphasis of the collection is 17th century Dutch and Flemish art, but there are also examples of Renaissance bronzes in there as well. Erskine had a highly successful military career, and although a lot more research is required, it is largely believed that it is through his military service and professional contacts that a lot of the works that form the Tor collection were acquired. So, for instance, Erskine was aide-de-camp to King George III and a good friend of the Prince Regent at the time, and they were major collectors of Dutch landscapes. As well as being interested in Dutch artworks at this time, British collectors and grand tourists also collected the work of Italian artists. And in particular, there was an interest in landscapes that showed idealized depictions of Italian architecture or ruins, as demonstrated by this work, which is credited to Giovanni Gesolfi, a Milanese artist who is known for painting historical, decorative, and architectural subjects. And in a sense, to kind of continue on this theme of architecture, Erskine also knew the university's library architect, William Playfair. And it is this relationship that some believe perhaps illustrate why Erskine might have chosen the university as one of the trustees of his collection. But what we do know from the historical records is that the collection was bequeathed by Erskine to, quote, lay the foundation of a gallery of art for the encouragement of the fine arts. Shortly after arriving in Edinburgh, the collection was loaned to the Royal Institution, which then eventually became the National Gallery of Scotland. And for many years, the collection was catalogued as part of the National Collection. And while much of the collection returned to the university in the 1950s and 80s, a few works from the collection remain on loan to the National Gallery today. So in some senses, the Tor collection was arguably one of the first substantial moves away from the university having ownership of artworks that were purely about identity building and commemoration. The function of the collection was kind of beginning to change in this period, and the types of artworks that were being acquired were different. And then these subsequent connections to the other institutions in the city perhaps start to illustrate the cultural position the university was building in this period. So as Claire mentioned, the Tor collection is just one of many sub-collections that form up the art collection. But there are also many examples of artworks that kind of come in together almost as anomalies or sit slightly together as smaller contained sets of works. And an example of this are the Gandara Fragments. These are 27 fragments which date from the 1st century AD or BCE. And these are the oldest pieces of art in the collection. For those of you who may not be familiar, Gandara was located at the foothills of the Himalayas, which now corresponds to northwest Pakistan and eastern Afghanistan. For centuries, Gandara was an important trade centre on the Silk Road, linking China to South Asia and the Mediterranean. And this setting is kind of reflected in the style and contents of its surviving artworks. There are very many great things to say about the fragments in the collection, but essentially what we're talking about are sculptures that were on the temples and commemorative mounds and monastic establishments in Gandara. The sculptures from Gandara are also, as far as is currently known, the earliest physical representations of the Buddha. So these 27 fragments in the art collection were presented to the university in 1872 by an alumnus of the university, Colonel Henry Campbell Johnston, and he was had various roles in the East India Company and was also a revenue surveyor in the Peshawar Valley in the 1860s, which is when we think he would have come across these. So these fragments substantially predate the university, the founding of the university, but they, I suppose, reveal a lot of the unethical collecting practices that were unfortunately common at the time of their donation. By the 20th century, the collection had grown substantially through acquisitions and donations, some of which we've mentioned. And recent and ongoing research on the collection has unearthed how the university sought to tackle the management of its collection in the late 1940s. And this work by Anne Redpath plays a part in this kind of next chapter of the collection story. So our records show that in 1948, the then acting principal of the university began a series of correspondences with Professor David Talbot Rice regarding a concern he had about the university's administration of its artworks. So Talbot Rice was the Watson Gordon Chair of Fine Art at the university from 1934 to 1972. And he built up the Department of Fine Art at the university, and very crucially for us, he also took a keen interest in the artworks that the university owned and kind of compiled catalogues on behalf of the university court. And for those of you who have visited or who may be very familiar with Talbot Rice Gallery, this is also the man who the gallery is named after. So the letters give some context as to where the concern grows out of. Essentially, this was the increasing challenge of keeping track of artworks on campus. And the letters show how eventually a proposal develops to have a university committee that would manage the display and conservation of the university artworks, and that would handle requests and around donations and loans and photography of the university's artworks. In 1948, the Committee on Pictures and Objects of Fine Art is established and is appointed by court, and Talbot Rice is its chair. And the committee is comprised of different members of academic staff, as well as the university secretary and librarian at the time. And later on in the 1960s, we see how the committee's responsibility develops to also include, quote, to decide about purchasing pictures for the university. And we see as well that they go on to receive an annual grant from the university to purchase artworks, and then these are then displayed on campus. Interestingly, and although portraits were still being considered by the committee, correspondences also show how Talbot Rice had a very specific vision. He states that he wants to purchase, that the purchases are more often modern, as I'm trying to build up a collection of works of Scottish painters. So the minutes from 1966 and 1967 show that this work, Spanish Doré, by Anne Redpath, was purchased by the committee in the academic year of 1965 to 66 for £252. Redpath was an ECA graduate and is a very significant Scottish painter, and so it's not surprising that she was on Talbot Rice's radar. At the time as well, the committee were also interested in collecting work by Joan Erdley, William Gillies, and Robert McBride and Robert Calhoun. So in some respects, the Pictures Committee kind of demonstrates a shift in the governance around the collection, but also a continued building of the cultural capital of the university and its establishment as a collector of contemporary Scottish artists. There are many links between the art collection, Scottish artists, and the Scottish art education. And these can be seen through the artworks collected throughout the years. But these connections are truly galvanised in 2012 when the University of Edinburgh and Edinburgh College of Art merged. So as Claire mentioned, at the time of the merger, the Edinburgh College of Art collection comes under this wider art collection umbrella. And this union marked a very significant change for the collection in that the collection grew substantially in size, the demographics of artists represented shifts, and also a wider range of media is represented. For instance, the ECA collection includes the cast collection, which comprises 265 plaster casts of antique, Renaissance and Gothic statues, bas-reliefs and architectural passages. But actually, the casts at ECA are actually older than ECA. So they were in fact transferred to Edinburgh College of Art from the Trustees Academy in Edinburgh, where they were acquired in the late 18th and 19th century for the training of fine artists in Scotland. So the Trustees Academy was the first public school of art in Britain, founded in 1760. And perhaps even more interestingly as well, when ECA was built then in the 1900s, in the early 1900s, the sculpture court at ECA was actually specifically designed to house the casts of the Parthenon frieze, which were donated directly by Lord Elgin for the education of artists in Scotland. So the casts have remained on display throughout ECA's main building and still do so today. And they, in some respects, sit as reminders of these kind of evolving teaching practices and also the history of art education in Scotland. And really it was seeing how the ECA collection had developed over time through things like the cast collection to support the teaching of students. This is really what encouraged and kind of shifted our current curatorial focus for the collection towards the support of research and teaching across the university, including at ECA. And so finally, we just wanted to end with an example of one of our recent purchases, and it's a work that also highlights the connections to ECA and our support of contemporary art. So this is a work by Amna Sheikh, which was acquired as part of 2023 University of Edinburgh Art Collection Graduate Show Purchase Prize, which is awarded to selected graduates every year since 2012. And in some respects, the purchase prize is a continuation of a practice that was happening at ECA every year in the past. So works by graduates were chosen to be kept by the institution, and so this kind of practice was refreshed in 2012 after the merger. And over the past 11 years, we have purchased over 100 artworks by over 60 graduating artists. And this has become a really significant part of our holdings and a real annual highlight for us, and in some ways reflects the creative output of ECA. Very often as well, the purchase prize has been the first time that a specific medium is bought by the collection. And from a curatorial perspective, that's been a really important part of this activity. So The Richer a Persian, the Finer His Rugs is an installation of 4 hand-woven artworks that considers visual and material cultural histories of Pakistan and the effects and legacies of British colonialism. The title of each piece within the installation contains a proverb, and different texts have also been woven into the piece, illustrating the artist's interest in the historical context of languages. Amna wrote about this work saying, "I was intrigued by the history of Urdu literature, which originates from Persian Arabic script. From the 19th century, when Britain invaded Pakistan, these languages were used less as the British preferred using Urdu, and Persian became inferior. It is interesting to me that colonialism caused the shift in language and influenced the country so much that Pakistan is still affected by this too." The use of colour also points to how Western influences, or Western cultures influenced Pakistani art, specifically vehicle art. So many of the trucks, buses and rickshaws in Pakistan are hand-painted with vibrant pattern, colour and text, and Amna kind of noted this link between the imagery and pop art. And working with techniques such as weaving, but also embroidery and screen printing, have become ways for Amna to explore things like the labour of production, but also are ways of connecting to her British Pakistani cultural heritage and means to explore ideas of things like memory, language and identity. So this is just one artwork by 3 artists. This is one artwork of 3, that we acquired in June this year. And I'm sure you'll agree it illustrates the kind of incredible talent of the ECA graduates.
So I think that's probably over to us to wrap up. Thank you so much again, everybody, for joining us and giving over your evening to listening to our stories about the University Art Collection. Yeah, we hope that some of you might be interested in, seeing it and finding out more online and in other ways. So thanks, everybody, and have a good night.
Thank you so much.